You're welcome. We are now broadcasting and I will start sharing on social media in a moment. Give me a moment. We are now live on Facebook. Kelly, I will give you back the host.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you so much.
Kelly, you're not the host.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Kalirois Stavrianou, and on behalf of Global Clinical Engineering Alliance, I'm very happy to moderate this series of webinars that aim to educate, promote collaboration, and also promote information exchange about healthcare technology, engineering, and patients' outcomes. All our webinars are recorded, archived, and also live streamed on Facebook. Following the completion of the webinar, the recording material will be accessible on our website, www.globalcea.org. Please note that at the bottom of your screen, you may see a Q&A button. On this Q&A button, you can submit questions to the faculty that will be addressed towards the end of the webinar. In addition, next to that, there is the chat box where you can post general comments, and this is for audience interaction. Today's webinar is the third in the series. Professor Don Clark, the floor is yours.
Kalirois, thank you so much. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are in the world, whenever you are in the world, you are very, very welcome here for this third of our Global Clinical Engineering Alliance webinars. Now, you know, I might be biased, but as a clinical engineer of over 35 years experience, I happen to believe this is the best possible career. I mean, what can come close? Where we bring together the curious mind with the scientific expertise and our engineering discipline to focus on real world problems with the goal of maximizing the potential of technology for the benefit of patients. Our field is huge and very diverse. Even within the same country, what we consider to be the scope, the practice of clinical engineering can vary. And of course, that variation can be very much bigger when we look globally. At our recent Global Clinical Engineering Summit, just a couple of weeks ago, hosted by GCEA, we heard a lot about this subject. And this webinar is in part response to that activity. So today then, we've brought together for you three leading minds in the world of clinical engineering to help us look at that scope of practice. What do we do in clinical engineering? What is our body of practice? And then we're going to consider further what skills, what experience, what knowledge do we need in order to deliver these incredible services for our patients? What is our body of knowledge? And I'm sure we're all going to learn something today from this webinar. But it's not only a learning exercise, it's also the first step along a road of increasing our profile and our professionalism for what we do. It's to help us raise up our profession to the equivalent of doctors, to the equivalent of nurses, because after all, our work is every bit as important as theirs. Technology has become the very foundation of modern healthcare. And without clinical engineers to develop, to adopt, to support, and to manage that technology, well, that foundation could be quite fragile. But before we launch into the webinar proper, we wanted to run a quick poll, just 2 simple questions at the start to try and get a flavor, a feel for our participants' understanding in this field. So Kaliroy, is it possible, please, that we could have the first poll show? Thank you. So we'll just give everybody just a short while to look at these first 2 questions. They're single choice answers. The first one is just to find out a little bit about what you currently think, what you currently know about the body of knowledge. So the 4 answers you can put here then. Why are you here today? Is it because you want to learn something about it? You don't really know much about the body of knowledge and the body of practice at all? Do you know a little bit about it, but you want to understand more, and particularly how that might relate to your work, to your own work environments? Do you actually know a lot? And you've come here to help us, to participate in this, to ask questions and to see how we can move this forward? Or actually, do you not really know? You're completely unsure. So if we just give you maybe another 5 or 10 seconds to click on those answers, which one best relates to your circumstances? Okay, I'm not sure how many answers we've had so far, but if you haven't answered already, please do so now, because I'm going to ask Kaliroy to close that first question for us. Kaliroy, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be able to see the answers at this point, but I can't, so I'm instead, I can now. Thank you very much. Well, that's very interesting. We're gonna use these results later to help us decide how best to take this forward. And it's a fairly interesting spread there. Perhaps not surprisingly, most people, nearly half the people here, know a little bit, but want to learn a bit more. And that's good and proper, and hopefully we can help you with that. Okay, thank you for that, everybody. That's been really helpful. What we'll do now then, without any further ado, is we'll move into our webinar proper. And I'd like to introduce to you our first presenter, our first speaker. So our first speaker is Frank Painter. Frank is an adjunct professor within the biomedical engineering department at UConn, at the University of Connecticut, with a long and distinguished career in clinical engineering practice, and particularly understanding education. And he's published articles on clinical engineering, education, and careers. So who better then to kick off our seminar today than Frank? So I'll hand it over to you, Frank, who's going to talk to us about the body of practice and the body of knowledge, and particularly with a USA-based survey. Frank.
Yes, thank you very much, Dan. That was a very nice introduction, and I agree with you completely that clinical engineering is a very satisfying career and a very exciting career. So could we have the next slide? Yeah, very good. So we're going to talk about this body of knowledge survey and how the American College of Clinical Engineering did it. And so what we're really doing is we're looking at the profession of clinical engineering and applying engineering principles on how we can systematically analyze what we need to know and what we do on a day-to-day basis. And if we can successfully analyze this body of knowledge and body of practice, we can begin to, it really does help us. It helps us. So, one of our objectives is to support the clinical engineering profession worldwide. And if we define what we do and what we need to know, that will help because this, quantification of what our profession is all about weaves into so many aspects of supporting our profession. For instance, as the clinical engineering profession changes, and it does, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but the results of the survey change. And therefore, we can use these survey results to track the changes in clinical engineering practice. We've decided that we need a certification exam, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And the body of knowledge can be used to define, what percent of the questions should be about technology management, and what percent should be about safety, and what percent should be about financial management. So we can use it to shape the CCE exam. We can use it to guide clinical engineering education programs. So wouldn't it be nice if the professors who taught clinical engineering education programs knew that, this is what a clinical engineer needs to know in the area of technology management, and that might be 30% of their job. And this is what they need to know in financial management, and that's 15% of their job. The educational program could be crafted in a way that is much more beneficial, and we might use it to adjust job descriptions. So next slide. So a little bit of history. So we're just going to go back a bit and then bring ourselves up to today. So the very first organization that I was aware of that supported clinical engineering was ACCE, Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, and it was formed in 1965. And then they decided that they needed to certify clinical engineers and biomedical equipment technicians, and they started a program in 1972. And then ACCE, and ACCE was not a professional organization, it was a trade organization. It had manufacturers, it had clinical engineers, it had just anyone who was interested in advancing medical instrumentation. It had a lot of people from the government, from the FDA. ACCE, however, is a professional organization. It focuses on clinical engineering, and it was formed in 1991. And then and ACCE continued to certify until 1999, when they decided that the interest in the certification program was waning, so to speak, and financially they decided that they would suspend the program. Well, ACCE made the decision that no, we can't, if we're to support clinical engineers, we need to have a certification program. So ACCE got permission from ACCE and began to restart the clinical engineering certification program, re-engineer it, so to speak, so that it was successful. And we did it in the right way. But one of the things about it was that we really needed this body of knowledge in order to design the exam in such a way that it matched the practice of clinical engineering. Next slide. So ACCE's clinical engineering certification program was identified as an important component of clinical engineering, but really any profession. So for instance, we know that physicians have a certification, it might be called licensing or it might be called something else, but it's similar in concept. So do other engineers and other professions, so do nurses, so do medical physicists, so do architects. So certification is important in a profession. So as clinical engineers, we need to have something like that. So that was good. A distribution of the certification questions must be based on the current body of knowledge. So we needed to create this questionnaire and conduct the survey and gather the information and define what the body of knowledge and body of practice was. And then, so the problem was that prior to ACCE taking over, the previous versions of the CCE exam and the CBET exam, biomedical equipment technicians, were really based on the opinions of the Board of Examiners. And there was no really scientific basis for it. So it wasn't accurate, it was adequate, but it wasn't, really good. So the body of knowledge survey was needed to quantify what we needed, what clinical engineers needed to know and what they were doing in their jobs. Next. So the body of knowledge survey measured the body of knowledge, which is, what do you need to know? And the body of practice, which is, what do you do in your job? And for simplicity, even though we know it contained knowledge and practice questions, we called it the body of knowledge survey. So the current thinking that we should call it body of knowledge and body of practice is a sound thinking, because that's really what ACCE's was. We just mislabeled it. And we needed, however, to make it scientifically derived and statistically significant. So it needed to have quite a few answers, or otherwise it wouldn't be statistically valid. And we developed it to the point where it is, made it easy enough to administer and easy enough to collect the data, so that we could get a lot of individuals. So in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 people answer the questions whenever it's given. And since the practice of clinical engineering changes over time, the survey needed to be conducted periodically, and we weren't really sure what that would be, but we knew that. So next slide. So you can see, so at the bottom there, we conducted the survey in 2001 at the start of the program, and again in 2005, 2010, etc. And even one is being conducted. The questions were, the survey was just concluded, within the last few weeks, and the data is now being digested. So what about changes in the body of knowledge and body of practice? We know that that things do change. For instance, healthcare changes. The healthcare in general has become more digital. More digital information is available, and it's being collected and being printed and put in the chart, or the chart is being made electronic. And in order to manage that whole system, it requires different thinking. So clinical engineers need to change in order to accommodate that. We also, of course, have changes in technology, where more and more devices, and matter of fact, most devices are computer based. And it used to be at some point in the not too distant past that none of them were. So that was a big change. And then, of course, codes and standards change. The codes and standards making bodies get smarter, they gain more knowledge, they gain more experience, and they adjust the codes and standards to accommodate new realities that they discover. So, and we need to keep up with that. And then standards of care in the hospital, patient safety is a focus, whereas 30 or 40 years ago, it was not a focus. Quality orientation for healthcare is a very important issue. And just being more efficient in the way we deliver healthcare is, it changes, it has changed, and therefore we've changed in response. So as you can see, we conducted these surveys to measure all of this. So can we go to the next slide? So this is what the survey looked like. We had some knowledge questions, we had some practice questions. For instance, it might ask, what technologies do you focus on? Are you in general medical or physiological monitoring or surgical equipment? And you can check as many boxes as you want. Many people don't do X-ray equipment, some don't do clinical lab equipment, but there's all these technologies that you need to know about. There's other questions on knowledge, and related to practice, we might say, what % of your time do you spend in overall program management or product selection or incident investigation? And these individual questions were like program management and product selection may have been rolled up into technology management, and incident investigation might have been rolled up into risk management, and CMMS administration might be rolled up into maybe healthcare technology management. User training is a separate issue, regulatory compliance. So the point is that there were maybe 100 questions about where you spent your time. Can we see the next slide? But what happened is so the 100 questions are all related to the information in the paragraph below the title. So technology assessment, how much time did you spend in that? How much time did you spend in usability assessment, or product or vendor selection, or device integration planning? And if you gave answers for those questions because you were involved in those activities, the percentages then rolled up under technology management as the main title. So there were many, many questions, but only a few major categories. Can we see the next slide? And here's another example: service delivery management. You know, we might spend time in technician supervision, or service contract management, or equipment repair and maintenance, or equipment acceptance, or equipment performance testing. These are all were activities that we consider to be service delivery management. So, so you get the idea that there were maybe 100 questions, but they rolled up into just 8 answers. So can we see the next slide? Yeah, so this is just a rough, I rounded, and some I rounded up and some I rounded down, some I truncated, but for the most part, this is pretty accurate. This is the results of the 2005, 2010, 2015, and 2018 body of knowledge survey results, and what the current exam, what the distribution of questions is in the current exam. So as you can see, technology management is 26, 32, 31, 28. It's pretty consistent. It's the highest amount of time that clinical engineers spend. And if we average those over the last 3 or 4 years, it might come out at, 5 or 10 years, it might come out at 30%. So we have a little bit of a problem that the Board of Examiners decided to, that maybe these answers weren't valid, and they would have 35% of the exam on technology management. But everything, other than that particular example, the percentages pretty well match. And in fact, the Board of Examiners changes the mix of questions. So there are 150 questions on the CCE exam, and 35% of those are technology management, and 20% are service delivery management, and 5% are product development or product evaluations. 10% are IT and telecom related. So you get the idea that there are major categories, and we monitor the adjustments over time, and you can see that it does change. We think it changes because of all the reasons I mentioned, but it might change because ACCE did send this survey internationally, and there are quite a few clinical engineers from outside the United States who responded. And one of the things that we know is that clinical engineering practice clinical engineering practice around the world varies from country to country, from region to region. And I think Khalil will probably talk a little bit more about that. So can we go to the next slide? So that chart summarized in words is roughly here, that technology management responsibilities over the years, over the past, 16 years, in that time period that we analyzed, they've increased slightly. Service delivery management responsibilities have remained the same. IT focused responsibilities have increased slightly. Risk management has pretty much stayed the same, and general management responsibilities have decreased. And I tried to imagine what that might be, why. And I think what it is it used to be that most clinical engineers were managers, but we have so many more clinical engineers being trained and put into the workforce that they're generally doing clinical engineering work rather than program supervision. And that may be why the general management decreased, because of the increased number. At any rate, it's interesting information. And then next slide. So this is the current distribution of clinical engineering certification questions. That's the same numbers as were in that chart. This information is published, and also the major titles and all the minor categories are also published in the CCE handbook on the ACCE website. So, and I, in my reference slide, which I believe is next, no, two more slides, it will tell you how to get there. You can actually click on the link and get that document to learn more about the US program. So, and one last, if we can go to the next slide, this is sort of, it's based on the body of knowledge, but it's a study guide for clinical engineering certification. And what happened was ACCE saw that some of the candidates were a little unsure. So ACCE developed a book that lists the 98 topics that are divided into the 8 major sections. And they wrote 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 pages of information along with some references and some questions to help the candidates study. And these are all based on the questions from the body of knowledge survey. So this is a pretty good reference document as well. Finally, the last slide. So if you have this presentation and you have the ability to click on those links, it's a little hard to type them all in, but you can actually get a copy of the ACCE newsletter that has these surveys from 2010, 15, and 18, and get a copy of the clinical engineering handbook. So the last slide is just to thank you. There's my name and email address should anyone want to contact me. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Frank, and thank you for an amazing presentation. So much detail, so much data. It's a wealth of knowledge that I'm sure we can build on and take forward. I'd just like to remind everybody, all of our participants, that when you've heard all 3 of our speakers today, we're going to have a little Q&A at the end. So if you've got any questions that you feel are more global in nature, more broad in nature, then do save them up. We did just have a couple of quick ones you might want to address immediately, though, Frank, if I can push them to you. Roland's asking, to whom did this survey go? It may have changed, of course, over the period of time, but how did you know who to send the survey to? Do you have a list somewhere of everybody that's registered to receive it?
We do. And what it was is ACCE had a list of everyone who was a member and everyone who was sort of interested in ACCE activities. They collected all the email addresses and they sent the survey to everyone regardless of their profession. But in the survey, they asked, what is your profession? So we got some BMETs, we got some nurses, we got some FDA people, we got some biomedical engineers from industry, and they all filled out the survey. And what we did was then extracted just the clinical engineers who are working in hospitals in the clinical environment, applying biomedical engineering principles to healthcare, and we use the numbers from those.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I hope that answers your question, Roland. Very helpful. I'll give you just another quick one now, and we perhaps save the others for the end. But you may want to truncate your answer here because I think it's quite a challenging question. How would you recommend a country that doesn't have anything like a registration scheme in place now? How do you start? Who do you have in place who can evaluate the students, if you like? Who evaluates the people if you don't have any system in place? So how might you kick that off?
Yeah, so that is exactly what the United States was like 40 or 50 years ago. Just anybody got a job who was interested in hospital and clinical engineering. And then eventually educational programs were formed and then academics helped. And then societies were formed and organizations were formed. And then under those, the certification process and the body of knowledge survey and just sort of managing the profession. So to me, the short answer is the first step is to form a solid clinical engineering professional organization in your country or region.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
And ask questions because we would be happy to give you the entire dump of all the data, all the questions, everything we have. None of it is proprietary, and we're interested in seeing the clinical engineering profession worldwide grow.
Brilliant. Frank, thank you so much. There's been another couple of questions, but I'm going to pause on those and we're going to pick them up if we have time at the end. I'm just going to echo that point that Frank made there about sharing good practice. One of the absolute reasons that the Global Clinical Engineering Alliance was established was just to do that, to be the body, to be the facilitator of that sort of sharing. So please do come and speak to us, look at the website, and we're there to help clinical engineering professionals worldwide. Okay, if I may, I'd like to move us on. Thank you again, Frank, to our second speaker today, the venerable Saeed Khalil. Now, Khalil was one of the first names I came across when I first started being active in the international field of clinical engineering. I think at the time he was probably chair of the IFMBE Clinical Engineering Division, and whatever you do, don't tell him this. But I was somewhat in awe of his role and his reputation. But now I've been working alongside Khalil for a number of years now on the Founders Council of GCEA. And I can tell you, having worked alongside him, that all those stories that I'd heard about him actually turn out to be true. He is every bit as knowledgeable and generous as I'd been told. So it's my huge pleasure to introduce Khalil now, who is going to talk to us from an international perspective about the body of practice survey. Khalil.
Thank you, Dan. This is too much for me. I wasn't expecting that. But thank you. It's been great to be with you, with all those people that are participating in this webinar, because I know they are dedicating their lives more than 20, 30 years to clinical engineering. It is a big honor to be among them, to be here and participate in that. Now, I'm going to talk about a survey we've done with the body of practice and body of knowledge. And as I say, is a worldwide survey. And this was a very bold, let's just say, exercise. We learned a lot. And I will make some comments at the end, but I would like to present you some of the results we had. Two things I want to tell you. First, perhaps you excuse me, sometimes I forget the English words and I have to rewind my brain. And the other things, I have to take notes because there are so many informations that I have to give you that I would try to give just examples and then take notes to point out what are the principal things in the graphics I'm going to show you. Please, Khalil, the next slide. Yeah, I will try to tell you a bit of history about this worldwide survey. Of course, we've done before the big one in 2017, we've done in 2005. But let me go back. In 2004, Dr. Joachim Nagel is a German guy and some colleagues presented the result of a worldwide survey. So he showed the main problems were lack of highly qualified personnel, limited funding for technical training, continuous pressure to reduce cost, increasing department efficiency. Look, this was 2004, we're in 2021, and I believe, maybe I'm wrong, but nothing had changed. It's the same problem we had before. I would say 16 years ago, it's exactly the same. So, but in 2005, we needed to learn more about clinical engineering. And then we started with the University of Stuttgart, IFMB and ACCE. They started to make some meetings, to organize some meetings. And from those meetings, discussing about what should be the body of knowledge for clinical engineers. And it was very good. It was a fantastic meeting. They called lots of people worldwide, but mainly from US, because they were the one more advanced due to ACCE. And they released several documents, but among them you have agreement for mutual recognition of qualifications for clinical engineers and a protocol for training clinical engineers. That was the point in Europe. So it was difficult to say this is going to be worldwide. And despite the great effort that this was done, there were several obstacles restraining the progress of this initiative to become global, as I said. for instance, there were no discussion to carry on the work. So we done the documents and that's it, finish, no other discussions. The documents were heavily based on the clinical engineering model adopted, as I said, by the American College, meaning to adapt the American College model, sorry, the US model to the Europe, it wouldn't fit. And if you're going to extend to Latin American countries, Asian countries, then it will be a problem. As I said, document aiming the clinical engineers in Europe, and document would serve only as a source of consultation for countries outside Europe. So in fact, it was a fantastic trial, it was a fantastic exercise, but nothing happened. Please, the next one. So in 2007, we from the clinical engineering division of the IFMBE, we started to say, well, we should develop something, we should do some survey by our own to understand what's going on around the world. We thought we would understand more, and I think at the end we'll be more confused, but I will tell you. But the objective was to identify the profile of the professional, I say, called clinical engineer. That was a point. Well, who can be called clinical engineer? What are the basic body of knowledge they have to have? And it was good to know about his activities and the kind of employer. Who are the, or where those guys are working? Next slide, please. Now, the conclusion in 2007 is there were quite similar activities in different parts of the world. That was true, that we found that. Some, depending on the country, they were more or less sophisticated according to the culture and knowledge of the region. And we done something like we divided the world, we separated in different regions. And that may be one mistake we've done at that time. I'm not saying we didn't repeat it, but it was a mistake. And this similarity can be we came also to the conclusion in 2007 that these similarities in activities could be the basic for developing stronger international cooperation among clinical engineers and clinical engineering professional organizations. So 2007, we were already thinking about GCEA, okay? I would not talk about the CED, I'm not criticizing, but GCEA is something that could be exclusive to clinical engineering. And observe that in 2007, there was a need for the organization that could be a hub exclusive for clinical engineers. And of course, correlated professions working in the healthcare system worldwide. Please, the next one. Now, this picture show you the results we get at that time, 2005. And you see, it's a bit confused, but perhaps there's a better way to show you. But then that's what I had at that time, and that's one way we found. Each line color represents one region. So here I found just three to not too easy the way you understand the graphic. So you have Latin America, Europe, and Asia in yellow. And you can see that there are, say, coincident things on each one of these, the lines. So let's just say service delivery. What I want you to observe is not how many people responded, but is it a trend? So worldwide, there is a trend, for instance, for education. If they practice less or more, it really is not the issue here. The issue is the trend. So clinical engineers are interested in education. Clinical engineers are interested in quality control. That is the thing we found, that was the characteristic we found at that time. But just to say, respondents from Asia are less involved with education, but it follows other region trend. That's what I wanted to say. So there are discrepancies, but that's what we were learning at that time. Okay, please, next one. Sorry, here, please, could you go back? That was the first one, that was the one, sorry. Okay. Kaliroy, I think you jumped one. Sorry if I have not, the one that was before that. Conclusion 2007. Okay, that's fine. Sorry, I am the one mistaken. Yeah, that was the one I was looking for. Normally, I try to, in my presentations, I try to present this picture. And when Frank Baker said that clinical engineering is a dynamic profession, that is a graphic, that is a table that shows you how dynamic it is. From 1970 to 1980, you have a few activities, I could say. Till 2015, you have more and more and more activities growing. So what I wanted to say, point out here, is that this was finished in 2015, but I am sure as we are in 2021, we have more things to put here. For instance, we have today 3D printers that can manage, can let's just say, try to make some spare parts or some other gadgets that clinical engineer will need. So more things are, more activities are developed by clinical engineers, and I think I have to include it in the future, but not in the far future, in the very near future. Here's the next one. I think it's this one now, isn't it? That's right. And this one, sorry, the next one. This is 2005. Forget about that. Just carry on, please. I said more than I should say, and then I lost track here. But could it be the slide 7? Yeah. Now we are talking about the 2017 survey, and you will see some of the things changed, but not the trend changed. Some of the things are interesting to happen. Let's show you the service delivery management here, which is, I think, the second going clockwise. You see that most of the regions, they have more or less the same trend, the same number of percentage of time within these activities. What the question here was, how long do you spend in such say in your work? How the percentage you spend in your activity regarding technology management, service delivery management, product development, sorry. And then you will see that most of the clinical engineers in service delivery are about the same time, same percentage. But when you go to Australia, which is the green one, it shows you that they are very heavily involved on service delivery management. And there wasn't few responses. There are more than 52 responses from Australia, and they show they are very involved on that. And then you see also when you go to education, again, as we saw in 2005, education, many clinical engineers are in the regions are involved with the education of all. They spend some good time, a very good time, on education of other people. So this is the way I can see the graphic today, is how they dedicate, what are important for them, what are the work activities, the percentage they spend in each one of the activities. Please, the next one. Yeah, that's the point here. I think Kaliroy is right. When I sent her the slides, she said it's not good to put this animation, and I was stubborn, and I did, and I am the one that made this mistake. But anyway, that's I think you understood what I want to show you. But let me discuss some of the things. One of the most challenging tasks when you design a word, and that's why I said it was a very difficult thing to do, is to develop a question that means exactly to all respondents. That's not important. That's not possible. We got the ACCE model, and we tried to apply the same model worldwide. It doesn't work. because every clinical engineer, depending on the region and even the country, they understand in a different way. Even if you write down what we want to mean by, let's just say, service delivery, it doesn't work. We have to deal something to understand a better, we have to do a better thing to understand what clinical engineers are doing worldwide. It's not easy. Due to language and cultural differences, as well as different academic system and job titles, people tend to respond according to regional characteristics, what they learn, what they apply, how they are, the activities they developed. For instance, clinical engineers in Latin America are forbidden to get near the patient. You can get near the equipment, but not the patient. Japanese clinical engineers, they deal with the patient, they do dialysis with the patient. So that's the kind of culture you have to understand before you do a survey. So, as I said, depending on the regional characteristics, you will have some distortions on your interpretation. Some data obtained can be corrected by CP, translating to English, and others you have to have a better understanding of the country academic system, how they understand that word, that what you mean by that. Next one, please. Now, as Frank said, there is a need to periodically update information. I mean, we did this in 2005, and then we did in 2017, and we need to do another one. But to do that, we need people to help. It's not easy. So, as also said, the engineering profession is extremely dynamic. I think every 5 years, you will see a different set of activities. I would say education, I would say service delivery, but you will see different activities for different equipment. For almost every new technology and procedure to be used in the healthcare area, a new set of knowledge is necessary. It's required regarding technology life cycle stage, from innovation all the way to disposal. Every equipment has its own characteristics, and they have to develop different activities for that. It was possible to see that despite difference between countries concerning the practices that clinical engineers are developing, there are a common set of practices. As I said, you see the trend. That was what I wasn't interested. There is where they are applying. If there is a discrepancy between, let's just say, clinical engineers in Europe and clinical engineers in Japan, when you say, what about these activities? Do you dedicate some time? And in Japan, they will say, no, we don't do that. But you see, there are some activities that there is a trend that you can follow to make the body of practice. I would say a common body of practice that people, clinical engineers all over the world could learn. So, as I said, more studies are necessary to define a solid worldwide body of knowledge. If this is possible, we have to define and make a different strategy. But when I said to Frank that in US, it's a lot easier to apply a body of knowledge, a survey, because we have the same culture, same language, and worldwide is a bit different. Thank you very much.
Khalil, thank you so much. What a fascinating insight to the challenges of gathering that sort of data internationally, and I applaud you for the work that you've done and colleagues have done in pulling that together. We've got a number of very interesting questions in the chat and in the Q&A. Some of them are quite broad, and in the interest of time, because I'm really keen that everybody, some people on the call might not have very long, and I want everybody to have a chance to hear all our speakers. In the interest of time, I'm going to leave those questions, but we are going to pick them up. We have got a slot at the end to do Q&A. There was one very quick question which is very pertinent to your presentation, Khalil, and if you could try and answer this one briefly for us. You showed a table where the number of activities, the range of activities that clinical engineers do increased dramatically from, I think it was 1980 until 2015. if there are that many different increased number of activities that we're doing, was there an increase in staff? Did you get any idea that there was an increase of staffing levels, or are individual practitioners just spending a little bit less time in everything and spreading themselves thinly over all those activities?
I think they're spreading themselves thin, really. There's no increase in staff. The more you have different activities, the healthcare system asks them to do a different activity with the same number of staff, really.
Thank you for that, and thank you everybody who's putting questions in the chat and in the Q&A, and I'll do my best at the end to come back to as many of those as we possibly can. But right now I want to move us on, if that's okay, to our final presentation today. And this presentation is going to be given by Stefano Bergamasco. Now, Stefano is something of a force of nature in the Italian clinical engineering scene. Being the vice president of the Italian Association of Clinical Engineers, he's run a number of companies providing clinical engineering services. He's a consultant in healthcare technology, and he's the current secretary of IFMBE-CED. And not only that, he's a member of the Founders Council of GCEA, and today he's going to talk to us just a little bit about clinical engineering as a profession and the role of the body of knowledge within that. So, Stefano.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to Frank and Khalil for their amazing presentations. I'm humbled to be part of this great team of speakers today and of the Global Clinical Engineering Alliance. I will touch some points, and there are some topics that are particularly relevant and important for me also personally. I will focus something about the profession of the clinical engineer, where we are going, starting from what we have been told today in the previous presentations. But I would like also to focus on a concept that is the diversity in career paths and the shifts that can happen in one person's life in their career path. Also because, and I will show something in a specific slide later on, we have a lot of what we have been saying apply very well to the typical clinical engineer working in a hospital or providing services in a hospital. But we know that more and more colleagues work in very different settings. And so it's also a challenge for the body of practice and body of knowledge to embrace all these different career paths. So let's get into the content. Next one, thank you, Kaliroy. I will use a lot of content from this publication. It's very recent. It was published in the last issue of the Global Clinical Engineering Journal. So I leave you the URL of this open access journal that is somehow the home of the publications from the clinical engineering community, and you can read the full article here. So I will skip something for the sake of time, but this article has a very interesting title: Is clinical engineering an occupation or profession? And what are the differences? And what does it mean for us individually and as a global community? So next one. We start with a couple of definitions taken from the dictionary. So basically, an occupation is considered as a type of work where someone is doing some productive activity, a task, service, trade, etc., for which one is paid. So some regular activity where you earn money. So this is the concept of occupation. It's very broad. It can be running a business. It can be a profession, as we will focus now. It can be being an employee. A lot of what I'm going to say applies to an occupation as being employed by a bigger organization. Also in terms of mindset, I would like all the people that are following here today to focus on the mindset rather than only on practical aspects. So next one, let's see what a profession is considered. Again, from the dictionary. So a profession is an activity that requires specialized training, knowledge, qualification, and skills. And here you can see we are moving into the realm of body of practice, body of knowledge, and certifications. These are really important concepts. That's why it's so important that we keep on pushing on these concepts. And here is a key phrase I highlighted, that the main objective of the profession is to render services to those who need them. And I'm not referring to clinical engineering just now. I'm very broad. Any profession, anyone who can consider himself as a professional is rendering services to those who need them. There are then some characteristics of a profession, and I will focus on these in the next slide. So next one. Is there a clear demarcation between an occupation and the profession? As I said before, an occupation is a broader concept, so it could include as a subset the concept of being a professional. So number 3 in this slide could be the right answer, but it's not so clearly defined. So let's dig further and let's see some of the differences. Next one. In the article that I mentioned, there are listed 9 main differences between an occupation and the profession. I do not, even though I'm an author of this article and others contributed a lot to writing it, there are some that I fully agree on and some that I think are open for discussion. I will not read them all. I would like to focus just on a couple of these. One is that the profession has an expected code of conduct. So there is, like in number 3, a particular or professional body statute. So there must be some umbrella organization. We know that in engineering and in clinical engineering also, we have at national level organizations that may be formally established by the state or among professionals that bring together clinical engineers. So this is a common trait of all professions, to be gathered together by a professional body that also provides credentialing, certification, and this kind of uniformity in the body of practice and body of knowledge. There's one aspect that can be controversial, but I think it could be very interesting, not just for the practical and obvious aspects, but for an important concept. And it is that a profession is usually paid more than who is just working as an occupation. I remember around 15 years ago, I think, when I first met Frank Painter in my first trip in the US. And I participated to one of the ACCE meetings. They were talking about certification. And one thing struck me a lot, that this certification program was totally voluntary. There was no mandatory from the state or from any states that you must be certified for any kind of position. But nevertheless, clinical engineers that were certified got higher position in their jobs and got higher pays in average. So this means that this kind of certification, this kind of recognition is recognized by others, by the society in general, by employers. So this is another aspect that characterizes a profession, and that I think is quite important. Next one. Some examples. I'm still broader than clinical engineering. So what are examples of professions? In the clinical area, we have medical doctors, clearly considered as professionals. We have the nurse, we have the lawyers, the architects. The nurse is a good example. It's a good example because nursing internationally moved from being considered a kind of a trivial job, doing repetitive tasks, to being a profession. In many countries, they developed academic programs. You get an academic degree now to be a nurse. So you have a nursing association. So this is a very interesting example of an occupation that evolved toward a profession. So how about engineers and clinical engineers? Let's next one. So I will not go into the classical definitions of engineering and the practice of engineering, but there are some important traits that as engineers we have: education, training, and experience. And in almost all countries, a professional engineer must be duly licensed as a professional engineer by a board with exams that take into consideration their education experience and the exam itself. So engineers are clearly a professional figure. Next one. So, as I said, clearly a profession with some relevant characteristics, mastery of their domain of practice. But there's an aspect that is very important, that we must remain current with the growth and changes in knowledge base. As Khalil was showing, and Frank also, the body of practice and body of knowledge is evolving, and it's not so easy to remain current. And sometimes we are so busy with our daily job that we don't keep a higher view of what the trends are, what could be important to learn, to follow, to be always updated. Next one. In terms of clinical engineering, we think that what we said about professionals in general and engineers as a professional figure fully applies to clinical engineering. We have a commitment to serve. There was a question, so I will start also touching some of the question from Michael Cheng about patient safety being at the center of our activities. Of course, that is true. And in terms of providing services to those who need, this is clearly focused. One of the clear focuses for us is patient safety. However, we do not have to consider that only providing like immediate patient safety related activities leads to patient safety. You do preventive maintenance, safety checks, it's clear. But if you do good procurement, you save money for the organization. Doesn't it lead also to more resources, to better care and patient safety? So I think that everything we do is related to patient safety. And as clinical engineers, we have a body of knowledge, or we need to follow it and develop, as we are discussing today, specialized set of skill, practices, and performance. Ethical aspects are so important to define and follow. And to define a common ethical conduct, it's very relevant to have some umbrella organization driving it in a uniform way, at least at national level, but even better if it's at international level. And the last point is why we are here now, almost 100 people following this webinar, a professional community. This is really a key aspect that makes a difference between just having a job for the paycheck and being a professional engaged with the profession. Next one. I will skip this one because it's just a table summary of what I mentioned. Thank you, Kaliroy. So I was mentioning at the beginning, and I'm going to the conclusions in a few minutes. So I was saying at the beginning, diversity and shifts in career paths. Where do you work as a clinical engineer? You may be working at a hospital, public or private. You may work with an independent service organization providing maintenance or other services to the hospital. These two probably are 80 or 90% of the occupation and the professional activity of clinical engineers worldwide. But we have clinical engineers working at manufacturers, engineers working as professor, PhD students, or researchers in the university. You can be employed in a consulting company or be running a consulting company, or you may be a freelance consultant as an engineer. What I want to say, in my personal opinion, it does not really matter if you are in one or the other. It's a mindset. Do you live your role as an occupation or as a profession? This is really a shift in engaging with other colleagues and in being more recognized. You can be the top manager of your own consulting company, or you may be employed in a hospital. It's a matter of being recognized as a professional. And it's also important to consider, especially for our young colleagues, that I think could be the main target of our efforts in terms of body of practice and body of knowledge, that it's much more difficult today than it was maybe 30 or 20 years ago, that you come out of university, you find a job at a hospital, you work there 40 years and you go to pension. It doesn't work like this anymore. You change job, you change positions, you used to work in a hospital, then you do freelance consultancy and whatever. And I always advise young colleagues not to consider themselves as, I check my timesheet in the morning, I go back home, and that's life for 40 years. If you want to do so, that's nice, but maybe you choose the wrong profession. I would like to say so. Different paths. This is also a difficulty for what Khalil was saying in defining a body of knowledge and body of practice, because it could be very different. It was mentioned that a lot of activity is about equipment management or maintenance management. But if you work for a consulting company and you do regulatory compliance for manufacturers, you do a totally different job. Nevertheless, there can be a core of competencies that you, to be labeled as a professional clinical engineer, you must have. And that should be our focus now. Next one, and I go to the conclusions. Next one, please. So what do we need to improve? And so what's the work that we need to do? As we were saying today, body of knowledge and credentialing programs towards certification. Certification, I was amazed by the example in the US for the clinical engineering certification program. We are thinking of something like that here in Italy and or in Europe. We are in an effort to build a European Federation of Clinical Engineering Societies, and we are also committing to be part and growing the global alliance. So it's a matter of thinking if these certification schemas should be national or international, with the correct warnings that Khalil was mentioning before. However, we think that for the sake of discussion and reasoning altogether, an internationally coordinated effort is a really important element. Next one. So this also because we need an international uniformity. Every country is different, every setting is different, but even in the same country, then you can do very different jobs. So it's not really a matter of finding what's different. It's more important to try to find what is common. And an international approach could be really, really important for each of us. And we recommend that the Global Clinical Engineering Alliance can be the good player in this moment across so many stakeholders: academia, industry, healthcare providers, government agencies. Next one, and I finish with, I think it's the last one. So I like always to close with a takeaway message. So my final takeaway message is that we need to be working together to facilitate what clinical engineering practitioners, so all of us, we deserve this. What is that we deserve and we need to do? There are, as I mentioned, there are many professionals in the healthcare team. There are medical doctors, nurses, lawyers, and so on working in the hospital and being recognized as truly professionals. We need to work to improve our self-perception and consequently the perception that others have of us as the clinical engineering, the engineering and technology professionals within the healthcare team. I think this is really important. Despite daily activities, we are full of duties and so on, but I think it's mostly a matter of the mindset that we apply to our self-consciousness as a professional clinical engineer. Thank you so much. Next one is my thank you to all of you.
Stefano, thank you so much for that that insightful presentation on professionalism in our career, in our place of work. I love that phrase you had quite near the end there about we need to find what's common and not look for what's different. I think that's going to be I'm going to pin that up above my desk now and work to that in all that we do. So thank you so much for that presentation. If I can just talk to the audience for just 1 minute, we have trespassed on your time already by overrunning slightly on the scheduled 7 till 8, the 1 hour slot that we had today. But please stay with us. We're going to extend just another 5 or 10 minutes because there's some really interesting questions that have come up that which we haven't had a chance to address. So I'd quite like to do that now with the panel. And since Stefano was already speaking, I'm going to give him the first one. And the first one's actually possibly quite a tricky one. So Juan asked the question about, it was specifically about the USA, but I think it can be more general, about whether clinical engineers actually repair equipment and maintain equipment, or whether that's biomedical technicians, however we use the terminology. And it opens up the question about, is there a difference between clinical engineers and technicians? At least one a profession and one an occupation? And basically, what are your thoughts about that, Stefano?
Well, there's a personal anecdote I would like to report here. When I used to work for an international maintenance organization, and we had one of our subsidiaries in the UK. So I happened to come quite often to the UK, and it quite impressed me the term engineer that used to be used in the UK. So engineers, with this word, are what we call the technicians. So I never really learned what is then an engineer. Is it a super engineer, or what is it? Maybe Dan can clarify this to me now, but the words are also difficult because different cultures and different countries. Having said that, I sometimes envy those engineers who are able to use a screwdriver and fix things. When I talk with my daughters, I say, yes, I'm an engineer, but I'm not able to fix anything, sorry. So I think it's really a matter of living your profession in so many different possible ways, and all contributing to the common goal. So that's why the graphics that Khalil was showing, the radar graphics with so many different points, are so important, because our profession is so wide that you can be a valuable clinical engineer being fully involved as field engineer, or you can be a project manager. And totally different activities, both are very, very important.
Thank you, Stefano. So I'm going to come to some other questions now. I'm going to throw this first one at Frank, if that's all right. It came from Carol earlier in the evening, and she talks about that some students that come to us in their experience come to us lack a certain amount of hard general engineering skills. Coming out, is there something? How do we relate the body of knowledge? And how could that body of knowledge influence the development of biomedical engineering academic programs?
Yeah, it's a very good question. The problem is that the organizations that govern the curriculum content for undergraduate programs have tremendous influence. And so if a university who gives an undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering decides to get creative, they may lose their accreditation. So most undergraduate engineers, whether they're civil or mechanical or whatever, electrical, biomedical, they have a certain set of information they have to get. This is a fine differentiation between a body of knowledge. The undergraduates get the knowledge about the principles, and in my opinion, the graduates get knowledge about or get closer to the practice. So I think the body of knowledge is most appropriately pointed or beneficial to graduate programs. I don't think there's much flexibility in undergraduate programs unless you get one in clinical engineering, but so far I've not seen any.
No, indeed. Thank you for that. Okay, I'll start with you, Khalil, on see if you can pick up this one, and we might come to others. Stefano, at the end of his presentation, was talking about the importance of patient safety in response to a question that he picked up in the chat. And we could take that question further. If and Stefano was really clear on this about how everything we do in the clinical engineering profession impacts on patient safety. How do we get that message into the public's mind? How do we raise the profile of patient safety being what we're about in clinical engineering? I think you might be on mute, Khalil.
Yes, sorry. I think clinical engineers already are very, very conscious about patient safety. In the survey, I didn't have time to show, of course, there are many informations, but one of the sections of the survey, it's regarding risk management responsibility. And the survey divides the risk management in several categories. And they ask about how is important patient safety, expert witnesses, risk management, investigation, and so on. And so the person has to say, no, this is not important, minor, moderate, and high importance. He could rate. And you will see in the graphic that patient safety is the highest importance they attribute, they rate. So I think clinical engineers know how important is patient safety about their responsibility. This is good.
Okay, thank you for that, Khalil. So I'm going to push you all to be as brief as you can on this. I'm going to ask the final question to each of you, the same question. It comes from Rosanna, and she asks us to share one aspect, just one aspect of the clinical engineer's profile that we think has changed over the last 5 years. What would the key thing be for you, Stefano?
Well, I like always to go personal. So I just mentioned you that despite the external world changing, so we know the trends, artificial intelligence, we could mention information technology, digital health, and whatever comes to our mind. But let's go to the personal profile. I started after graduation working at university as a contract researcher. Then I moved being employed by a multinational maintenance company. And finally, I started up my own thing, and I mostly work in laws and regulations with manufacturers. So I would like to say that we must keep an eye to what's changing around us, but it's mostly feeling that we ourselves can move through different things in this wonderful profession.
Thank you for that, a clever answer. Frank, what would you say was something that's changed in a clinical engineering profile for you?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, the technical aspect, interconnectivity of medical devices, the importance of transferring data back and forth on the network, cybersecurity. All of these are technical things that have forced clinical engineers and technicians to become much more aware of and more effective in the area. So that's one thing. I just see, at least in most of the clinical engineers that I look at, more and more awareness of the importance of financial management, of managing vendors, managing service organizations, managing contracts, managing budgets, and just an acute awareness. Whereas before it was something in our life like a cloud. Now it's there, clear as a bell. Those are the two things. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Frank. Khalil, can you succinctly mention one change that you've seen in the clinical engineering profile?
Dan, I think I'd say that locally, my region in Brazil, it's difficult to say that this is happened worldwide. But here in Brazil, for instance, what do you say? IT is the thing that really progressed here. Equipment integration was one. Cybersecurity also was in the last 5 years. It really took off. I mean, people were not care about that before that, but then now it's really everybody's talking about cybersecurity. So that's one of the examples.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much. So we've now heard three amazing presentations from our panelists, and we've answered a number of the questions. I wondered now whether Khalil, Kaliroy, sorry, we could move on and have a quick look at the second poll. For those of us that have stayed with us, so thank you so much for staying with us beyond our allotted time. But we wondered now at the end of the webinar whether we could have a look at this second poll, which basically asks a similar question to the start, and has things changed? Now we've got to this point in the evening, in the morning, have things changed for you? So in terms of an awareness of the body of knowledge, the body of practice, and clinical engineering as a profession, would you say now that that you're still unaware and you still need to learn more? Do you think you know quite a bit more now, and you understand its relationship with your work? Has this webinar helped you learn more about the subject? Do you still think you understand a lot and you'd like to help us teach others? So if you could answer those questions for us. And also the second question on the poll right now is whether you believe the minimum level of the body of knowledge and body of practice can become common around the world. I think that is one of our challenges. How can we make it common, standard, harmonized around the world? So do you think that is possible, or do you think no, you can't see a need for this? Do you think yes, but only for a few countries? Yes, for most countries, or yes, it should be as an international professional guideline, or you still not understand, still not made your mind up about that? If we can just give you another 5 seconds to tick one of those, and then I will ask Kaliroy to close that poll. So if you can close it now for me, please, Kaliroy. Brilliant, thank you. So so we've shifted the quite right too. We've shifted the audience along a bit in our knowledge. The webinar has helped, and that's fantastic. And if we look at the second question there, I'm really heartened. I really am to see that nearly half of us think that this can be an international professional guidance, because this information are really valuable. Thank you for filling in this little mini poll. Will help us at GCEA develop our policies and start helping to put resources together. So so thank you so much. Thank you so much for responding to that. So I don't know about you, but I've had an amazing evening here today. And as well as learning a lot, and I hope people on the call have also learned a lot. I think we need to see that we need to think about what our next steps might be. We need to consider how best to build on or perhaps consolidate the body of knowledge to support practitioners in the field of clinical engineering, so that they can gain education, gain training, skills and experience that we all need to raise the profile and the recognition of our area of work from an occupation to a profession. And so many benefits would flow from that if we can do this. We'll have better access to training and education. We'll have better recognition. We'll have more support for the work that we do. We'll have more engagement from other healthcare and political people. We'll get better provision ultimately of healthcare for the people that we serve, and that's ultimately what we're here about. Now, GCEA are blessed with having access to world-leading clinical engineers who can help us progress this agenda. It's a core aspect of our mission, and we're going to seek to develop policies and resources to support clinical engineering practitioners all over the world. So please help us do that. Join the GCEA. Visit our website for more information about our mission and the work that we're doing and the plans that we've got to try and support the body of knowledge and the professionalism of our service that we're all so proud to be a part of. We look forward at GCEA to being able to bring you future events like this and to report on the progress that we're making in this really exciting and important area. But for today, I'd like to sign off by thanking our three speakers, Frank, Khalil and Stefano, for their insightful presentations, illuminating and enjoyable presentations. Also to thank Kaliroy and Lewis for their unseen but crucial role in supporting these webinars, and to everyone on the GCEA Founders Council for organising such an informative and stimulating program of webinars. And of course, I'd like to thank you too for joining us today and being part of this webinar. I hope you found it enjoyable. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you will support us in taking this agenda forward. And I look forward to welcoming you again in future Global Clinical Engineering Alliance events. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dan. Great job. Great job moderating.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Beautiful. Bravo. Bravo.
I recognize this voice.
Yeah, Dean, two things. Dan, I think he was a member of parliament in England, and he's just disguising because he speaks so much, call attention. Very nice.
Superb.
Thank you.
Superb.
Super, Dan. Very nice.
It's
And
not
the
an
second-
occupation, it's a profession there.
That's right.
Indeed, a profession.
And the second thing, I think that as Frank is here, we should invite him to be part of a project for a worldwide survey. Because
Absolutely.
we need to do that. We need somebody that has experience. I mean, when I did the first time, it was difficult. I learned a lot and I learned my mistakes. But now Frank has done, I don't know, 5 or 6 surveys, of course, in the States. But if he could help us to do a worldwide survey, it would be fantastic, Frank.
Well, he
What
has a
say you?
microphone. Frank has a microphone.
I have a microphone.
Yeah.
Was
So
there,
you
did you, I'm
so you
sorry,
can-
did you ask me a question?
Yes, he pleaded for you to join the international surveys engine.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I was also, as Dan was closing, I was planning my visit to the Global CEA website to join.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
But I'd be happy to work on the global survey as well. I think, you know, ACCE's information should be, you know, merged with yours if the questions are similar, and the database could be huge, and, you know, and even ACCE has some, you know, 20 or 30% international participation, which could, you know, be sorted out and strengthen your data. So
Your expertise, Frank, would help guide this process amazingly good, and you will be surprised how much work we have put into it. So
yeah,
there's a good mechanism in the process here.
yeah,
Good.
and I'm
Thank
sure
you,
that,
Frank.
yeah.
Thank you. I will keep pestering you soon, writing a message. Hi, Frank, you promised, now you're on my hands.
And you have weaknesses.
Yes.
I tell you, Guy, first of all, Leroy, thank you. Things work very well in the background. And the participation, you maintain over 70 throughout the hour.
Yeah, brilliant.
Then there is additional community I visited on the Facebook channel that participated, but could not put question into it. So overall, we'll wait to hear how many were overall, but I was keeping note of the comments, the questions, and the compliment after each one of you talk was just, I was so proud. It was fantastic. Really, thank you.
We are still broadcasting live. Huh?
You deserve to hear. The world deserves to hear.
Thank you, Yadin.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
I'll
thanks
see you.
everybody.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
See you tomorrow on the board, and Friday early morning Eastern time in Milan.
Yeah,
All
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, cheers everybody.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Leroy. Thanks everyone.
Take
You're
care.
welcome.
Great job, Dan. Great job.
It's a pleasure. You all made it so easy. Thank you so much. Cheers now.
Cheers.